Ghosts roll.
Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, so that's, that in a nutshell is kind of like so that's in a nutshell, gives you a sense of the movie. We're looking at personal transformation, how once you've had that kind of personal, deep experience of transformation, you then recognize the need to kind of help this initiatory process that's happening more on like a global level. And then we're looking at tools and techniques and ways that we could begin to what's that? I'm sorry, I'm going to just give my talk right now. If you want to yell at me, you can do it later. Okay, thank you very much. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay. All right. Okay, cool. So anyway, so as I was discussing...
Go to the other stage, man.
Yeah. As I was discussing, I had these experiences of seeing the sacred geometrical forms, and then I began to think of where is there a real world correlate to that experience, and I began to get interested in the crop circles, and basically these patterns have been appearing for 20 or 25 years in England every summer, and I managed to get an assignment to write about them for Wired magazine, and I'd assumed that the phenomenon was a hoax, as most people would.
We are all put on. There you
Yes,
go.
I am a put on. I admit it. I put myself on every day and do the best I can.
Go to the other stage, bro.
So looking at these crop circles and getting to talk to people about them, I discovered that there really was a very deep phenomenon here, and that there was incredible complexity to the patterns. They were virtuosic and how they've been executed, and I began to talk to scientists who've been studying the phenomenon for years. There are biophysicists who've done all the scientific research on what happens to the plants in these crop circle patterns. And they've discovered that there's molecular changes to the plants that can't be explained by them being knocked over by boards and string. It have to be some kind of high heat, like microwave or electromagnetic energy coming from above. And not only have they done this research, they've published papers on it in peer-reviewed science journals. And if you understand how science works, if you put your information out in peer-reviewed science journals and it's not refuted, then that's really the operative hypothesis of where the science stands. So in terms of the actual scientific kind of methodology, the crop circles would be at this point made by some unknown energy source from above, which also correlates with what a lot of people have seen, these little orbs flying over these fields and these crops falling down. And so then there's the level of landscaping behind them and the virtuosity. And then there's like Gerald Hawkins, who was chief of astronomy at Boston University, was even studying the very simple patterns in the beginning, which were just these like patterns of circles. And he began to recognize that there were hidden Euclidean theorems in how these patterns were organized, and that they were showing different ways to like square the circle, to create these geometrical forms. And as he studied them, he realized that these were Euclidean paradigms that no human geometer had ever discovered. They were actually putting forth like a next level of Euclidean geometry. And he published these sort of essays about the math in the crop circles in science journals and made a contest out of it. Nobody was able to guess all these theorems. So at the same time, I talked to the guy from the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, SETI, the chief astronomer, which was this thing started by Carl Sagan, and he totally debunked it. He was like, look, it's just grain graffiti, and if aliens, wanted to contact us, they would, why wouldn't they just leave an Encyclopedia Galactica on our doorstep? And that seemed kind of like convincing at first, but I was like, well, on the other hand, like, we're talking about civilizations that maybe are like super far more advanced than we are. Like, how do we know how they would choose to communicate with us? It might be in some other way entirely. So I ended up spending one whole summer and parts of other summers in England studying the phenomenon. And I just began to collect more and more data about it. And it was very confusing, because I did have friends who had hoaxed patterns and were absolutely convinced that the whole phenomenon was a fraud. I also had friends who'd been researching the phenomenon for years and collected all of this, what they felt to be super convincing data that it couldn't be fake. You know, and then I would have my own experiences. Like the first time I went to visit a crop circle, it was this double mushroom formation that seemed to show a fly agaric mushroom or a amanita mushroom and a psilocybin mushroom kind of over each other. And you know, I'd written this first book on shamanism and psychedelics. The book hadn't come out yet, so I really felt like this being my first crop circle, nothing like it had appeared before. It was almost like it was a sign for me to like continue pursuing this path. And as soon as I walked into that crop circle, I synchronistically met somebody who became kind of my best friend among the crop circle researchers. And he'd just been driving down the road. You know, he'd been studying crop circles for years. He'd been listening to a Terence McKenna tape, and then he'd seen this pattern on the side of the road and gone into it. So the more I explored the crop circles, it seemed like this amazing kind of synchronicity vortex. And once again, almost like a psychedelic experience. And you know, so you know, over time, I just became more and more fascinated with it. And I began to notice that what would happen, I would bring different friends from when they come to visit me, and we would go to the patterns, and you know, how they were kind of oriented towards the phenomenon would somehow lead to the kind of experiences we would have together. Like I had a couple who were really skeptics about it from California, and they came and stayed with me, and we went out crop circle hunting, and all the patterns we found totally sucked. They almost looked like, you know, they were stamped down. You'd almost like find the boards right outside of them. Totally confirmed their skepticism. Another friend came to stay with me for weeks, and he was not a believer in the phenomenon. He was open to it as I was, and we had a series of extraordinary experiences where we would, you know, learn about totally pristine new crop circles. And if you enter the new ones, there's definitely a kind of palpable energy shift. You know, you go to them and you just basically almost feel compelled to sink down and meditate for an hour in silence, just to hold the energy of the formation. Maybe even be able to kind of measure that with different devices and so on. So then I had, you know, I went into a crop circle with another guy who was a kind of conspiracy, military, paranoia dude. And we were in a crop circle together for like 15 minutes, and this huge black helicopter appeared overhead and started flying around the formation and stayed there the whole time. So it was almost like his energy or his intention around the phenomenon had brought in this helicopter. Then I met this other woman in New York, and she was more like a new age, you know, bliss bunny type. And she got into a crop circle, and these beings of light, these bowls of light, came and visited her. And apparently they liked her so much that they followed her back to New York City, and now they live in her bathroom. And she calls them the extra celestials. You know. So it just, you know, what I began to over time come to, as my understanding of the crop circles, is that, you know, it seemed to me that it had to be something that wasn't utterly created by humans, which meant that it was some kind of interaction with a galactic intelligence, a higher level intelligence. And it seemed as if that intelligence was teaching us, that the whole phenomenon in itself was a teaching for humanity. And among the things that they were teaching us, it was a teaching on the nature of consciousness and intention in itself. And so that basically what you brought to this phenomenon in terms of your intention and your ability to be open to it is kind of what you would get reflected back to you and almost amplified and magnified back to you. Which once again I think is a kind of insight that psychedelic experiences also kind of bring up and establish. So I was wondering what everyone was looking at. I was like, oh yeah, those guys are painting over there. Anyway, so oh, thank you.